Great. Hello. So my name is Sarah Davison. I am a natural menopause expert and a homeopath. And today I'm going to be talking about perimenopausal burnout, which I see as the hidden saboteur of 40-something women. So I think the style we're going to do it is that Florence is going to interview me.
Absolutely. So Sarah, it's a great pleasure to have you. What is perimenopause?
Yes, so perimenopause is one of the phases of menopause. So let's put it in context. There are 3 phases to menopause. Actual menopause, clinically speaking, is only actually one day in a woman's life. I'm going to say that again because people often do a double take when they hear that. Menopause is actually only one day in a woman's life, and it's the day when it's been 12 months since you last had a period. That is when your periods or your your monthlies, are considered to have paused. So anything leading up to that, which could be anything between 2 to 10 years or to 14 years actually, is the perimenopausal phase. And in perimenopause, you still have a period. And then anything after that, where you still have symptoms, well, actually a woman is thought to be post-menopausal for the rest of her life. But hopefully we don't have symptoms for the rest of our lives, but on average, between peri to post, the average amount of time that women get symptoms is about 8 years, 8 to 10 years. Yeah, it's quite a lot. So the average age for the day of menopause in a woman's life in the US and the UK is 51, i.e. periods for the average woman stops at 50, at 51, they hit their day of menopause, thereafter they go into post. So what about before 51? That could be 2 to 14 years where you can have up to 49 symptoms and still have a regular period and not a hot flush in sight. And this is we'll go on later, but this is alluding to why it's the hidden saboteur, because not a lot of people realize it. So what I thought I would do is I thought I would share what the 49 symptoms are. And actually, there are probably more than this because I keep discovering new ones in my patients. So I'm just going to share my screen. So I think it would take me too long to read it out. So if you just have a look here, I'll leave that up for a little bit. So what you can see is it affects many, many different areas, tissues and organs in the body. And that's because those organs and tissues all have some kind of sex hormone receptor. So you can see there's a big part where it's psychological. You've got stuff going on in the nervous system, like electric shocks and tingling. Obviously sexual, a lot of people know about that, the loss of libido, vaginal dryness, very frequent candida or thrush, as we call it in the UK. And then you've got things like the cognitive stuff, the brain fog, the memory issues, oral symptoms. And then, you know, a lot of this you'll see it crosses over with adrenal fatigue, which I'll talk more about in a minute. But, you know, the fatigue, the weight gain, the headaches, I don't even know, sleep issues, increase in allergies, all those are related to adrenals. And of course the vasomotor, which most women know it for, you know, the hot flushes, the night sweats. So that gives you a feel for the 49 symptoms. And I guess the other thing to say, I'm just getting back to you, is that as a kind of overall thing about menopause is that menopause is not just about falling sex hormones. So when we're talking about sex hormones, we're talking about estrogen, progesterone, and testosterone. It's not just about that. The adrenal glands get involved, and that's where the burnout comes from. The liver really needs to be in good shape if you're going to have a good menopause. The gut has its own family of bacteria that create estrogen and like manage estrogen, and the thyroid. So it's like the whole system. So that's just a little bit of context on that question.
Of course, it's important to understand that. So why do women tend to get adrenal fatigue or burnout in perimenopause?
Okay, so There are two main reasons. The biggest one, I think, is because the adrenal glands, which produce our stress hormones, and they're the ones that get burnt out when we go into burnout, they have to work extra hard through perimenopause and menopause, because as the ovaries wind down in the production of estrogen and progesterone, the adrenal glands are supposed to pick up the slack. So the adrenal glands produce estrogen, progesterone, and testosterone. But if you go into perimenopause, so like late 30s, because your ovaries start the wind down in the late 30s and are really in serious wind down in the 40s, if you go into that already stressed, tired, overwhelmed, like a lot of us women who are doing more than one thing at a time and have lots of balls in the air, then you're setting yourself up for quite a difficult, potentially for very difficult perimenopause. So that's the one thing. So the adrenals are having to work extra hard. So if you're already stressed and then they've got this extra job to do, it's like, oh, I can't do that. They're like, I call the adrenals like our horses. They give us our horsepower. And they just collapse, basically. And then the other thing is that one of the roles of estrogen is that it opposes, if this is estrogen, it opposes cortisol, which is one of our stress hormones. So it actually keeps it in check. So if your estrogen drops, there's nothing to oppose your cortisol. And this is why many women in their 40s go, I just can't tolerate stress any longer. And they think they're losing it. They're just, when I went into my perimenopause, I suddenly became highly anxious about things that I used to do with my eyes shut. And I really didn't understand what was going on. And I see a lot of women going through the same thing. So adrenals have an extra job and less estrogen to oppose the stress hormone cortisol.
So why do you call perimenopausal burnout a hidden saboteur? Okay,
so big picture, it's about ignorance. So it's ignorance of women because we're not told this stuff. Before this is actually what my perimenopause is, what led me to be a homeopath, because it was my perimenopausal burnout that took me to a homeopath, that I saw such amazing results that I ended up training to be a homeopath. But it wasn't until I kind of got to menopause proper that I looked back and went, oh, that was I started doing some reading. That was perimenopause. So my ignorance, meant that I didn't really realize that's what had been going on in my mid 40s. Later on, I realized, but then, I wanted to share some stats around that. I'm going to read them off because I cannot memorize these, but there was a report done in the last year by an organization called Generation Menopause. And they talked to, I think, 2,000 women. And this is what they found. 49% of women could not name any of the phases of menopause, even when prompted. I was one of them. 46% hadn't come across the term perimenopause, me. Many of them only realized that what perimenopause was and that they'd been through it after the fact. 66% got completely blindsided by perimenopause. 39%, this is another study, thought they were too young, and 25% thought it was just stress. That was me. Just thought, I'm just not coping with stress very well. I've got too much on my plate. I had a toddler, a very demanding consultancy job, and I wasn't managing. 53% knew almost nothing about it until they started going through it. And 51% could only name 3 of the 49 possible symptoms of menopause. Even those in it often don't realize that, even some women in menopause don't realize that some of their symptoms, like for instance, joint pain or anxiety, are related to menopause, because we only know about hot flushes, night sweats, mood swings are the kind of main ones that people can name. So women's ignorance is what blindsides them. And then doctors' ignorance, I'm sorry to say, because what often happens is that women go into the adrenal burnout, high anxiety, can't sleep, even the anxiety might take them into a depression, they go to their doctor, and the doctor gives them antidepressants or sleeping pills, because apparently the UK government did a parliamentary inquiry around the whole of issue of menopause recently, and they found that 41% of UK medical colleges, menopause is not even on the curriculum. And I have to say, it wasn't any better in the homeopathic degree I did. I did a homeopathy degree, a degree in homeopathic medicine, and I was not taught anything about menopause. I was told a few remedies for hot flushes, and that menopause is what happens when your periods stop. I mean, it is so much more complex, and I've had to teach myself, basically. And then the other thing that happens is that in the GenM study, 1 in 5 women had to visit their doctor 6 times before receiving adequate help or advice. And I often come across women who say, oh, well, my doctor says my hormones are fine. And then I say, well, they're usually on my Thrive program, and we do the Dutch test, which is the dried urine complete hormones test, which does 35 hormones, and it looks at all the adrenal hormones as well. And you can see that their hormones are not okay. So it's women's ignorance and doctors' ignorance, and then they get all these symptoms and they think they're basically losing the plot. Some women that get the memory issues, they say, a lot of women worry that they're getting Alzheimer's. I mean, it's not a throwaway line, it's an actual concern, or that they don't really understand what's going wrong. So they've not only got the problem of the symptoms themselves and all that adrenal burnout and fatigue, which is so distressing, but they have the distress of they don't understand why it's happening. So that's why I call it the hidden saboteur.
Absolutely, perfectly adequate term. And it makes me think that, burnout is very similar. People don't know what it is, and many doctors still don't know what it is. So very, very similar. So when you combine the two, definitely.
Exactly. And I think, the effect in the workplace is shocking, because I personally think that this is one of the reasons why we don't have gender parity on boards and in senior positions. Because when a woman is getting into her 40s, if she's been climbing the corporate ladder rather than, say, working for herself, she's getting to those senior positions, and a lot of women step sideways. There are stats around this that I can't remember, but I think it's about 21% leave work, or they're taking a lot of sick leave. So it's a concern for gender parity. It's a concern for retention, and it's a concern for just productivity and well-being of female workers, and being understood by their line managers. So one woman I talked to, this was a friend actually rather than someone I was working with, and she said, I started getting really bad symptoms. I struggled on with it for a while because I didn't want to go on HRT. Eventually kind of sorted herself out with HRT, and once she'd gone on the HRT, she told her female boss that she'd done this, and the boss said, oh, well, I'll take you off the list for promotion then. So obviously you're not up to it.
Wow.
I know. So
wow. Beyond words.
Not that I feel strongly about it or anything.
No.
So I'm on a mission to educate people, which is why I'm here today.
Absolutely. So how might perimenopausal burnout look different from normal burnout? The same thing, different thing?
I mean, not really, because it is the result of tired adrenals, but the adrenals are tired because the person is stressed, but through probably their lifestyle, or that they have a weakness or susceptibility. It's the cause that's different. But then you add that into the ovaries winding down and the adrenals just being given this extra job that they just can't do. And so, the only thing that you might see is that you might see some other perimenopause symptoms that aren't related to adrenal fatigue, like I'm just trying to think, like hot flushes. But don't think that just because you haven't got hot flushes, you're not in perimenopause, because some people don't get any hot flushes, but they get 20 of the other, 20 other of the 49 symptoms. So yeah, not much difference really.
Oh, absolutely. And maybe can you give us an example of someone?
Yes. So I'm going to share my screen again with you. So just a quick kind of case story of someone. So the person I'm going to talk about, I've obviously anonymized, and this is not her picture. I'm calling her Virginia. And when she was absolutely typical of in terms of perimenopausal or menopausal woman, in terms of her life situation. So this generation, we call it the sandwich generation, and this is what creates all this extra stress. So she's sandwiched between still having kids at home and having a sick parent, her sick parent, or elderly, frail, sick parent living at home. So who's caring for her? She's got kids, and then she was running her own business as well. So she came on my Thrive program, and I mean, when we first met, she was a mess. I mean, she was really, I could see that she was doing a lot of adrenal fatigue. And when she did the Dutch test, the hormone test, her cortisol hormones showed like she was on the edge of like complete crash. And as a personality, you know, as a homeopath, I'm always looking for the underlying drivers beyond just the biological winding down of the ovaries. And she was very driven and no boundaries. And this is so she couldn't give herself boundaries, had to look after everybody else and couldn't say no to anyone. And that, I think, is one, I'm sure you're nodding, knowing that that's one of the recipes, the ingredients for burnout. And obviously the adrenal fatigue was making her, as well as the hormones, were making her very anxious, quite irritable. She was getting the neck and shoulder pain, the hip pain, the hair loss. And, you know, as a result of, and sleep issues, but now, you know, sleeping well, calm, not fighting with her husband any longer. She takes naps in the afternoon if she needs to, which is great. She wasn't doing that. Much better with her boundaries, and all the pain is gone. So she's got her life back, really.
Absolutely. Fantastic.
So that was about good timing, wasn't it?
Perfect timing. Is there, you know, we've got a couple of minutes left. Is there anything you want to add, or do we have?
Well, I guess the only thing to say, you know, if I were giving advice to anybody who's in their 40s, to say, you know, make sure if you're in your 30s or 40s that you are really looking after yourself and that you're looking at your stress levels. And I think that's quite a tricky thing to tell someone, because I think I was told that back then. And I thought, well, I work for myself, it's fine. But what I didn't realize is that my baseline of anxiety and drivenness was really high due to my personality, my childhood, you know, those kind of characteristics. So I think, you know, I always think that menopause is the great teacher. It exposes and shines the light on anything that's not in balance, physical or emotional. And for me, that's what it's done. You know, my big weak area has really been my adrenals and my liver. And I've really had to learn how to let go. I'm still learning, but really had to learn how to let go. Yeah. So I would say, you know, start looking at that in your 30s. Because otherwise you're creating a bumpy ride for yourself potentially.
Absolutely. Great advice. Well, thank you, Sarah. That was very enlightening. I think a lot to be learned from that, and to take better care of ourselves, basically.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you for being here.
Very good. Thank you for having me. It was a pleasure.
And I'll see the rest of you later on. Thank you, Sarah. Bye.
Bye.